Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Check what you're drinking with your lunch. This has got to be the more interesting story of the day. Producer James just put this in front of me. It takes America's producer to find news like this. High Noon is recalling its vodka seltzers mislabeled as Celsius. The FDA, right? So you think you're buying an energy drink, you're going to get the Celsius, and there's alcohol inside. High Noon announcing the recall of its vodka seltzer beach pack. You went for the beach pack, didn't you? That's the 12 pack. Due to inclusion, I'm reading off the news release now, of Celsius Astro Vibe energy drink cans that were inadvertently filled with vodka seltzer. Is my kid drinking that stuff at home right now? Consumption of the liquid, it says, in these cans will result in unintentional alcohol ingestion. Oh, Kailey, we're going to have to talk about that, too. I think they were drinking Celsiuses in the Leinz house. All right, let's get to what we're talking about here, and that's earnings reporting season. Look, maybe more people are going to buy it because right? Everyone's going to buy this stuff to try to get the can with the vodka in it, flying off the shelves. Maybe it'll be a collector's item. We've been hearing earnings reports from companies that are making us wonder here about the impact of tariffs and maybe the fact that they're actually finally taking hold. Really interesting series of stories here from some major consumer-facing brands, the likes of Procter & Gamble, now saying that it's cutting its outlook for the year and is increasing prices on a good number of goods, about a quarter of its products in the U.S., to help offset the cost of new tariffs, which, by the way, are going to be likely going up again on Friday. That's the date for reciprocal tariffs, at least with regard to companies that haven't cut so-called deals yet. This is really interesting. Bill George, former chair, CEO of Medtronic. He's now executive education fellow at the Harvard Business School. Bill George, you're going to see companies like Walmart, Amazon, and Best Buy forced to pass price increases to consumers. Main Street, this is important, has yet to see the fallout from increased tariffs. George says they're going to go higher. Add Stanley Black & Decker. Add the meltdown in Whirlpool yesterday. What UPS was also saying. It starts to paint a pretty scary picture about where we might be heading in the second half of the year. You remember Molly Smith just told us that when you look at GDP growth for the first half of the year, not just this quarterly number that was impressive today, stronger than expected, but we're seeing a real slowdown in the economy when you take a longer view. Now match that against the stock market that keeps hitting all-time highs. The S&P 500 is right below 6,400 right now, up another 14 points today. And we've got a big pile of earnings news coming. So we thought this would be a really good moment to take stock with Michael Regan, Bloomberg's managing editor for the U.S. here, and his eyes on not just the markets, but the way they're looking at these issues that we're talking about now in Washington. President Trump just today announcing a new tariff on India. This is, again, ahead of the August 1st deadline that he says will not move 25% on India's exports heading into the U.S. Michael Regan is with us from World Headquarters in New York, and I'm wondering if you're starting to feel like we're in nosebleed territory here, Mike, or if the earnings reports that we're going to get in the days ahead will actually justify these levels.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, I think the big tech earnings obviously are the main show for the week. Meta Platforms, the operator Facebook and Instagram after the bell, and Microsoft after the bell. Because, obviously the tariffs are starting to bite, as you point out. Whirlpool is a great example. They actually were in trouble because so many Asian competitors imported or exported to the U.S. a lot of competing appliances. So even though Whirlpool is, has a lot of domestic manufacturing, they still got hit because of that sort of trying to front run the tariffs. But really, the market, these mega cap tech stocks are just so heavily weighted in the major indexes, your NASDAQ 100s and S&P 500s, that that's the real story for the week as far as earnings go. And the real thing that a lot of people are zeroing in is actually something you don't usually look at for these companies, and that's capital expenditures, because they really are just writing giant checks for AI chips and data centers and trying to ramp up their AI offerings, either to meet demand from customers or to really improve their own businesses. So if you look at a company like Meta, I believe they're expected to double their CapEx spending to about $16.4 billion. Microsoft expected to increase it by about 30% to $18 billion. Now, it's interesting because oftentimes, before the AI boom, a big ramp up in CapEx would not be exactly something that investors would be happy to hear about. This scenario is a little bit more nuanced. We saw Alphabet a week or so ago announce that they expect to spend $85 billion on CapEx this year. And the initial sort of knee-jerk reaction in the market was a drop in the stock after hours. But then the executives got on the call and explained, no, we're responding to demand here from clients, and that's why we're spending so much. So it's, a lot of nuance as far as how these companies explain this giant expenditures on CapEx. If they can sort of illustrate that they are able to reduce costs or improve sales, fatten out those margins a little bit because of what they spend or expect to spend, then they're going to get rewarded. If it looks like they're just kind of gambling and taking a bet that AI will help them, then the market's going to be a little bit skeptical about that. But you're absolutely right that with these valuations, especially among those big Magnificent Seven tech stocks, as they call them, and the market at large, that we really are at a point where any bad news could be taken sort of in a worse fashion than it might have otherwise, just because of this ferocious rally we've seen since the lows in April.
Well, that was a great readout, Michael, and that massive capital expenditure you're talking about is the reason why we have yet another all-time high for NVIDIA today, because that's where so much of that money is going. Look at this thing above $178 now. It's up another 2% today. Absolutely remarkable as we wait to hear from these companies. Those we're hearing from tonight, we'll put Apple aside with all the talk of where it's going to assemble the iPhone and so forth that the president likes to talk about. Michael Regan, if you're Microsoft or Meta, are you tariff-proof? I mean, if you're selling software and selling ads, isn't that about as good as it gets right now?
Yeah, I don't know if you're 100% tariff-proof, Joe, but you're pretty well inoculated compared to, say, your importers of, your retailers especially. We'll hear from most of them towards the end of the reporting season. The banks as well, who we heard from at the beginning of the season, relatively tariff-proof. And not only that, all the commotion in the markets, the volatility and the heavy volumes were really a boon to your Goldmans and your Morgan Stanleys and your JP Morgans, any big bank with a trading desk. So that sort of front-loaded a lot of growth into the earnings season and a lot of better than expected reports. Now we really do get into the nitty-gritty of, big tech, obviously, as we said, but also these industrials, the retailers, the more consumer-facing names coming later in the season that are more exposed to the tariffs. I'll give you one example. PayPal came out and said, you wouldn't think this company is very exposed to tariffs, but they said the tariff effect has really just affected overall consumer spending. So lower volumes, not good for a company like PayPal. So really kind of sending an interesting macro signal from a stock like that. We also heard from Harley Davidson. That stock's up big, as Charlie mentioned, on its plans to take some investments in its financing arm. But if you look under the hood of their earnings, they also pointed out to a 125 basis point or 1.25 percentage point hit to their margins. So the anecdotes are starting to pile up. And remember, there's going to be a delayed reaction to these tariffs, I think, as Molly alluded to earlier. The quarter we're talking about now was that March to June quarter. So, it didn't encompass really a lot of the tariffs that we're looking at going forward. So it's a story, Joe, that's going to remain with us for the rest of the earnings seasons this year and beyond, for sure.
Yeah. We've only got about a minute left here, Michael. Walk me up to Friday. We get through the Fed today. We've got GDP, important data tomorrow. But Friday, we have a jobs report and we have the August 1st deadline. So presumably Donald Trump's going to have an event where he holds up a big board or he goes on Truth Social and puts up a whole bunch of new reciprocal tariffs. If that jobs report doesn't impress, the tariffs freak out investors. Maybe we have some shaky earnings in the next 2 days. What happens to the market?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to your point again, these, record after record and these really very richly valued valuations from the index side. Really, the market is priced to perfection, as I've heard several investors say. Now, I'm not sure the August 1 tariff announcements will have the potential to be too big of a shock because we already know what to expect with Europe, Japan, and China back and forth. But we have a pretty good sense of what the major trading partners are going to be. So on the payrolls report, I almost think an upside surprise will be more problematic for the market because of that. A lot of hope that the Fed will lower interest rates this year.
Fascinating to spend time always with Michael Regan, Bloomberg managing editor for the U.S. Watch the Celsius when you open the can, Michael. You don't know what's inside that thing today. I'm going to go grab one myself and see what happens. We'll assemble our panel coming up. Jeanne is with us, Jeanne Zaino, alongside Maura Gillespie from Bluestack. We're going to talk about what's happening today in Texas, maybe the most important underreported story today. They're redrawing the congressional map, and we'll have our panel with it next, only on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Doing some on-the-ground reporting here in Washington, D.C. with the big story. You heard about High Noon. This is like the third most read story on the terminal today. High Noon announcing a recall of vodka seltzer drinks it says were mislabeled as Celsius energy drinks. We know this because the FDA posted something on its website. We've got a full-on recall here. The company says consumption of the liquid in these cans will result in unintentional alcohol ingestion. This is something made for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as people head out to convenience stores around the country looking for a drink with the golden ticket. And, the crack team here at Bloomberg in Washington is all over this. Brendan went running for us here. Just going to play a little Celsius roulette. We got a couple of them. Tropical Vibe. I think this one's going to be okay. We'll test a few more of these cans as we make our way through the program. Why is Hakeem Jeffries in Texas today, you ask? It has to do with the redistricting that we've been talking about for days. We actually might see the map today. Republicans in Texas want to redraw the congressional map. Donald Trump says he wants 5 new seats in Texas, and it started a big conversation because it's off the clock. It's obviously in an effort to keep the Republican majority in the House, and some Democratic-led states like California say, well, they might get in the game too if this actually happens. Something we talked about with James Tallarico. Did you hear our interview with Tallarico? He's the Texas state rep, a Democrat who's also a pastor who's gone viral recently and might end up running for Senate in the state. He's taken a stand on Texas redistricting. Here's what he said.
The president has asked our governor, Greg Abbott, to find him 5 more congressional seats. He wants to redraw the political maps in the middle of the decade to try to protect his majority in the next election, regardless of how we all vote. And I think this is politics at its worst. Politicians picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. And so I'm doing everything I possibly can to stop this gerrymander from going through, to stop this power grab.
Politics at its worst, or using the system to maintain a Republican majority in the House by playing by the rules. Let's bring it to our panel for their take on this. I know Jeanne has had a chance to weigh in, and with the new information we have, I'd be awfully curious to hear from the Democrat on our panel. Jeanne Zaino is a Bloomberg Politics contributor and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, joined today by Maura Gillespie, Republican strategist, founder of Bluestack Strategies, and a veteran of John Boehner's Speaker's office, knows a thing or two about maintaining Republican majorities in the House. Great to see both of you ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. Jeanne, it looks like this is actually happening in Texas, and a lot of people have very simple questions about this, because Congress is supposed to actually be a mathematical equation here, right? You have the number of seats based on your population. So how can Texas actually pull this off? Or should this not be happening right now?
First of all, Joe, on behalf of Maura and myself, I cry foul on you opening these great drinks and we're listening to them and we get nothing, right, Maura? So please send them over. Thank you, Brendan.
I haven't. I'm going to just keep doing this as we make our way through the...
Joe.
No, this one's clean as well. Go ahead, Jeanne.
You know, this is, I think, just a fascinating story because it speaks to volumes as to how focused Donald Trump is on the midterm. For anybody who thought he was going to go out as a lame duck, you know, doesn't have to run again, doesn't care, this is anything but evidence of that. You know, the last time this was done with Tom DeLay, it wasn't driven by the White House, this sort of midterm redistricting in a state. But this is unusual because the call is coming from the White House, the Justice Department messaging Texas legislature and saying, hey, you guys may be in violation of the Voting Rights Act. You have to redistrict. So that's one fascinating element of this. I think it speaks to how difficult it would be for Trump if the Democrats take the House and or the Senate, but the House in particular, and how much he is investing in making sure that doesn't happen. And this is Texas's, you know, attempt, and I think we'll see others attempt to try to stave that off. And if they're successful, this would be, I think, a sort of laying the groundwork for what we're going to see going forward for these midterm redistrictings.
Hakeem Jeffrey says this is a moment that requires a forceful on-the-ground response, and that is why I am traveling to Texas to convene with members of the Texas House and Senate delegations, as well as our Democratic members representing Texas. He's going to be holding a news conference there, and then he goes to California later in the week. What's your thought on this, Maura? And can Texas pull this off? Donald Trump says this would be enough to keep a very thin majority in the House.
You know, I think it's interesting. We see this happen every now and again as far as state legislatures that decide to, you know, redistrict to put their party at an advantage. My former boss, Adam Kinzinger, he got districted out. You know, they paired up two Republicans together. It's not uncommon. It's something that we've seen happen before. But this particular situation, because, as you mentioned, the president's involvement, and as Jeanne pointed out, the heavy hand that he's playing in this, in order to protect the House majority, razor thin as it may be, to me signals that they're worried about their ability to message effectively of what they've done to the people, you know, to the American people, and you know, keep the votes they need, keep the seats they need to keep. And so, to me, as a Republican strategist, that's a red flag for me, that they're already getting ahead of this as far as we need to, you know, grab the seats, not necessarily earn the vote. And it harkens me back to thinking about January 6th and during the committee when President Trump asked Brad Raffensperger from Georgia just to find him, 12,000 votes, just find him these 5 seats. And so I think that that's going to sit a bit of a sour taste in the mouth of the American people as they remember that as well, because it does feel as though they're worried about their ability to effectively say, you should want to reelect us because here's what we've done to make your life better. And instead of doing that and going out on the road and having a robust August campaign schedule and really hitting the ground running here now and also throughout the next year as you lead into 2026, they're kind of skirting it by trying to take over these seats. Now, again, also Gavin Newsom's trying to do the same thing, right? He said he's going to come back, fight fire with fire, and do the same thing in California. Yeah. Where does that leave people, right? Where does it leave us?
Well, look, Democrats have 2 paths here, it seems. Jeanne, you can take the Hakeem Jeffries path. Maybe there are 3 paths. You could do Gavin Newsom, fight fire with fire, actually change the state constitution, redraw California, or you could take a legal route. That's what Senator Alex Padilla is doing. the Democrat from California you last heard about rolling on the ground with security guards at a Kristi Noem event, is pushing for an investigation, Jeanne, into Hatch Act violations. Politico says this, Hatch Act, because of the White House involvement that we've discussed, suggesting that appointees in the White House and DOJ broke the law by prevailing on Texas, along with other states, to redraw congressional maps. Which route should Democrats take?
I think they're going to pursue all of the above. I'm never a fan of trying to resolve political questions in the courts, but we have done that since time immemorial, as Tocqueville told us, and we will continue to do that. And he has a good point about the Hatch Act. I mean, the DOJ, the Trump administration, the White House is actively involved in this effort. And so it may be a violation. I think the sounder move for me would be the political avenue. I know that California, as you mentioned, Newsom, they're trying to think about redrawing. Kathy Hochul in my home state of New York trying to think about redrawing, although it is a violation of the state constitution. I think for me, one of the things is what Maura talked about, the messaging component here, is that Democrats have to couple this with a message, which is that when Donald Trump can't win on his policies, which polls show in many cases, putting the economy aside, are not particularly popular at this moment, including immigration, they try to find these votes. And so I think Democrats are going to use an all of the above strategy in trying to combat this. I also think there is a conversation that should be had, but probably won't, that we need to figure out about redistricting and gerrymandering in this country. It has not been something that has been addressed at the federal level, and very well should be, because what it does is it has really thrown a monkey wrench into our politics for a long time now.
Well, look, this is a conversation, you're right, that we need to have. And a lot of people believe, we've talked about this before, that it's one of the root causes of the extreme partisanship in this country and the gridlock on Capitol Hill. And Maura, I'm sure that you have thought about this a lot, too. If you look at the way some districts have been redrawn, even since you were in the House with John Boehner, you can't even recognize these Frankenstein districts. They don't make sense anymore in some cases.
It really doesn't. I got a quick look at the proposed Texas map that I saw, out on Twitter, and District 24 and 20 and 12 are overlapping each other, where a chunk of 24 is in the middle of 12. I mean, that is just, and I know, when Kinzinger was congressman, we had from the very top of the state of Illinois to the very bottom, we touched, it was really hard to get anywhere from one point of your district to the bottom point of your district, to in one day. You couldn't do it driving wise. And so it's tough. And it's based on the fact that they're trying to skirt these districts to get their most advantageous numbers for what they think will be a win. But I think that what it shows me, as far as Texas and California goes, Texas has turned, more purple. California has turned more purple. And to counteract that, this is what you're seeing. Where you have a Republican governor in Texas, so they're trying to take out those 5 extra seats to push Democrats together, and then potentially the same thing happening in California. But as I said before, it's like, where does that leave us as a country? Where does that leave us as the citizens who get shoved into these little districts that are so wonky that you're not even sure your next door neighbor could be in a different district for all you know? And so it's very confusing. Yes, it's very confusing. And it doesn't, I'll say another Boehnerism here, it doesn't pass the smell test. It just feels icky.
Well, yeah, look, and it happens all over the place to both parties. Jeanne, you remember when Barney Frank got redistricted? He couldn't win his own district in Massachusetts. Along comes Joe Kennedy, and he's got to balance a district from Brookline to Fall River, constituents who have nothing in common with themselves, which really upends the candidacies and the campaigns in these districts, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is on both sides of the aisle. It is usually every 10 years. And now we're seeing more and more at these midterm points during this 10-year period. And it has really, really made it very difficult for us to have competitive elections in some of these districts. The number of competitive elections in these districts has gone down dramatically. And so what that means is we have people running for Congress who are running to the far left and the far right to win these very funky districts, as Maura called them, and they absolutely are. And that does a disservice to all of us. And so it's one of these structural challenges we've long faced that has a huge impact on our day-to-day lives and politics and should be addressed by either Congress, arguably, or the courts, but has not. And now we see what's going to happen, and I think likely will happen in Texas and potentially elsewhere as we move to the midterm.
What a great conversation. See what we can get done around here when we're not trained on the Oval Office for 3 hours a day. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.